I thought I knew the man I was planning to marry until I discovered he'd been using my money to fund his secret gambling addiction while I paid his bills. 2 years ago, I moved in with my boyfriend of 4 years. We'd been talking about marriage, kids, the whole 9 yards. He seemed responsible, caring, and we split everything 50-50 at first. Then his financial situation started getting complicated, as he put it. His divorce had been finalized 3 years prior, but the alimony payments were crushing him. Every month he had to send $1,500 to his ex-wife, plus child support for their twin daughters. I felt terrible watching him stress about money constantly. He'd pace around our apartment, checking his bank account obsessively, muttering about how tight things were. When he first asked me to help with the alimony payment, I hesitated. It felt weird paying money to another woman, especially his ex. But he explained that it was temporary, just until he got a promotion at work that he'd been promised. He looked so defeated, so ashamed to even ask. I couldn't stand seeing him like that, so I started covering the alimony, $1,500 every month, straight from my checking account to hers. He promised he'd pay me back once his situation improved. Meanwhile, he'd handle all our other expenses: rent, utilities, groceries, everything else. It seemed fair enough. The first few months went smoothly. He was so grateful, constantly thanking me and promising things would change soon. He'd surprise me with little gifts: flowers, my favorite coffee, a new book I'd mentioned wanting. Nothing expensive but thoughtful. It made me feel like we were a real team, supporting each other through tough times. But then I started noticing things. He'd come home later and later from work, claiming he had to stay for overtime to make ends meet. Yet our joint savings account wasn't growing the way it should have been if he was working extra hours. When I asked about it, he'd get defensive and change the subject. I also noticed he was more secretive with his phone. He used to leave it lying around freely, but suddenly he was taking it everywhere, even to the bathroom. When it buzzed with notifications, he'd quickly grab it and turn it face down. If I was nearby when he was texting, he'd angle the screen away from me. The breaking point came 6 months into our arrangement. I was doing laundry and found a receipt in his jeans pocket. It was from a casino downtown, dated from the previous weekend when he'd claimed to be working overtime. The amount on the receipt made my stomach drop. He'd lost $800 in one night. I confronted him about it immediately. He broke down crying, admitting he'd been gambling for months. The overtime was actually him staying out at various casinos around the city. He claimed it started as just a way to blow off steam from work stress, but it had spiraled out of control. What made it worse was realizing that while I was dutifully sending money to his ex-wife every month, he was throwing away our future at poker tables and slot machines. I felt like such a fool. All those times he'd thanked me for my sacrifice, he was secretly hemorrhaging money we desperately needed. He begged me to forgive him, promising he'd stop gambling immediately. He said he'd get help, that he'd never touch another card or spin another wheel. The tears seemed genuine, and I wanted to believe him so badly. We'd built a life together, and I wasn't ready to throw it all away over this. But I wasn't naive enough to just take his word for it. I insisted he give me access to all his accounts so I could monitor his spending. He agreed without hesitation, which made me think maybe he was serious about changing. I also told him I'd continue paying the alimony for now, but he needed to find a way to take that responsibility back within 3 months. Update 1. Things seemed to improve for about 6 weeks. He came straight home from work, showed me his bank statements regularly, and even started cooking dinner more often as a way to contribute since money was tight. I was cautiously optimistic that we'd gotten through the worst of it. Then I discovered something that shattered what little trust remained. I was looking through our shared laptop for a document when I stumbled across his browser history. He'd been on gambling websites, but not the kind I expected. These weren't casino sites, they were cryptocurrency trading platforms and forex trading apps. When I dug deeper, I found out he'd been day trading with money from our joint savings account. The account I'd been assuming was growing from his overtime pay was actually shrinking because he was moving funds out to trade with. He'd lost over $12,000 in just those 6 weeks, convinced he could make back his gambling losses by trading. I felt physically sick. While I was congratulating myself on monitoring his traditional gambling, he'd found a whole new way to gamble with our money. This felt even more calculated and deceptive than the casino visits. He'd looked me in the eye every day, showing me bank statements that didn't reveal the full picture, while secretly betting our savings on cryptocurrency fluctuations. The confrontation this time was uglier. He tried to argue that trading wasn't gambling, that he'd been learning strategies and following expert advice. He showed me articles about people who'd made fortunes day trading, convinced he could be one of them. The delusion was frightening. He genuinely believed he was investing our future, not destroying it. I realized then that this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about fundamental honesty and respect. I couldn't build a life with someone who would look me in the eye and lie so smoothly. The man I thought I knew would never have put me in the position of unknowingly funding his addiction while he gambled away our future. I stopped paying the alimony immediately. I also opened my own private bank account and started moving my money there. I told him he had 1 month to figure out his financial situation because I was done subsidizing his problems. The look of panic on his face was almost pitiful, but I couldn't let myself feel sorry for him anymore. Update 2. 3 weeks into my ultimatum, everything fell apart in the most unexpected way. His ex-wife showed up at our apartment one evening, furious and demanding to know why the alimony payments had stopped. This was the first time I'd ever met her, and the conversation that followed turned my entire world upside down. She wasn't just angry about the missed payments, she was confused about who I was. When I explained that I'd been the one sending her money for the past 8 months, she looked genuinely shocked. She told me that according to their divorce agreement, alimony payments were only supposed to last for 2 years, and that period had ended 6 months ago. My blood ran cold. I asked her to repeat what she'd just said, thinking I'd misheard. But no, she confirmed that legally, he hadn't owed her alimony for half a year. She'd been receiving my $1,500 monthly and assumed he was just being generous to help with the kids' expenses, even though he wasn't legally required to continue payments. The revelation hit me like a truck. For 6 months, I'd been sending $1,500 every month to a woman who had no legal claim to it, while my boyfriend pretended it was court-mandated alimony. He'd been using my guilt and sympathy to essentially steal $18,000 from me to fund his gambling addiction. When I confronted him about this, he completely broke down. The truth was even worse than I'd imagined. He admitted that he'd known the alimony period was ending, but he was so deep in gambling debt that he'd panicked. Rather than tell me the truth about his financial situation, he decided to trick me into continuing the payments so he could use that money to try to win back his losses. He'd been taking my $1,500 each month and immediately gambling with it, hoping to hit it big and solve all his problems at once. When he inevitably lost, he'd just wait for next month's payment from me and try again. The cycle had been going on for half a year, with me completely unaware that I was directly funding his addiction. The betrayal was so complete and calculated that I couldn't even process it at first. This wasn't just gambling or lying about money. This was an elaborate con that had stolen months of my life and thousands of my dollars. He'd watched me sacrifice and stress about our finances, while secretly using my own money to gamble against our future. His ex-wife was surprisingly kind about the whole situation. She offered to pay back the money she'd received during those 6 months, but I told her to keep it for the kids since she'd been expecting it and had probably budgeted around it. She wasn't the villain in this story, she'd been just as deceived as I had been. Final update. I moved out that same week. I couldn't spend another night under the same roof as someone who could deceive me so thoroughly while looking me in the eye every day. The man I thought I loved didn't actually exist. He was just a character my boyfriend had been playing to manipulate me. What hurt most wasn't even the money, though $18,000 was devastating to lose. It was realizing how easily he'd lied to me, how convincingly he'd played the role of a struggling man trying to do right by his family. Every grateful kiss, every thankful hug, every promise that things would get better. It had all been performance art designed to keep me funding his addiction. The aftermath was messier than I expected. Mutual friends didn't know what to make of the situation. Some thought I was being too harsh, that gambling addiction was a disease and he needed support, not abandonment. Others were horrified by the deception and couldn't believe he'd manipulated me so completely. It created divisions in our social circle that lasted for months. I also had to completely rebuild my financial life. Between the fake alimony payments and his trading losses from our joint account, I'd lost nearly $30,000 total. I had to move back in with my sister temporarily, while I saved up for a security deposit on a new place. Starting over at 32 felt overwhelming, especially knowing that my savings had been gambled away, while I thought I was being a supportive partner. The hardest part was learning to trust my instincts again. For months afterward, I questioned every relationship decision I'd ever made. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so naive? I replayed conversations and situations over and over, looking for clues I should have caught. It made me paranoid and suspicious in ways that weren't healthy. But slowly I started to rebuild. I threw myself into work and started taking evening classes in financial planning, partly to understand money better and partly to feel more in control of my future. I made new friends who didn't know about my situation, which helped me feel like a whole person again instead of just the woman who got conned by her boyfriend. About a year later, I heard through mutual friends that he'd moved back in with his parents after losing our apartment. The gambling had continued even after I left, and he'd burned through whatever money he had left. His ex-wife had also stopped accepting any voluntary payments from him after learning about what he'd done to me, which meant he had less access to his daughters than before. I felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing about his downfall. Part of me felt vindicated that his actions had consequences, but part of me just felt sad for everyone involved, including his daughters who were suffering because their father couldn't control his addictions. The whole situation was a mess that hurt multiple families, and could have been avoided if he'd just been honest from the beginning. Now 3 years later, I'm in a much better place. I've rebuilt my savings, bought my own small house, and I'm dating someone new who's refreshingly transparent about money and everything else. I've learned to see red flags I missed before, and to trust my gut when something feels off. Sometimes people ask me if I regret helping with the alimony payments initially, even the legitimate ones. I don't regret trying to support someone I loved, but I've learned the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Real support involves honesty and accountability, not elaborate deceptions that protect someone from the consequences of their choices. The experience taught me that financial compatibility isn't just about having similar incomes or spending habits. It's about sharing the same values around honesty, responsibility, and partnership. Money problems can be solved, but trust problems are much harder to fix. I'm grateful I learned that lesson before we got married and had kids together, even though it was painful at the time. I still think about him sometimes, wondering if he ever got help for his gambling problem, or if he's still out there manipulating other people to fund his addiction. But mostly, I focus on the future I'm building for myself, one based on honesty, financial independence, and relationships built on genuine trust, rather than elaborate performances designed to extract money and sympathy. The whole experience was devastating when it happened, but it ultimately made me stronger and wiser. I know now that I can survive betrayal and rebuild from nothing. That's a kind of confidence that can't be taken away, no matter what life throws at me next.